You know, we're often defined by what we do and not by who we are. And I used to be Mr. Hollinghurst, head teacher. And I'd like to take you on a little journey through my life that happened to me over the last 5 years, where I've gone from being Mr. Hollinghurst, head teacher, to Andy Hollinghurst, head teacher. And I was a head teacher. I was a really, really good head teacher, even if I say it myself. And when I was being interviewed for the job, the chair of governors said to me, do you want a drink, Andy? I said, oh, yes, please. And he said to me, have a drink of water. He said, I'm sorry, it's not wine. He said, but if you can turn it into wine, you've got the job. Now, bearing in mind this was a church school. So I said to him, Chris, look, if I can turn that into wine, I don't need the job. And he thought that was quite funny. And I think that maybe helped me to get the job. Well, I got the job. And I was a very good head teacher. The staff liked me, the children liked me, the parents liked me. And I was getting to the stage, doing the job so well, that other heads were coming to me for advice, saying things like, Andy, you're so laid back, how do you manage to cope? It's wonderful. Can you give me some advice on this? I'm really stressed out with this and I'm really struggling. And unfortunately, I was beginning to get pretty stressed myself. I was beginning to lose my vision, the way I wanted to go. I was heading for a storm, and what was happening was that the things that I was good at, I wasn't good at anymore, and I was beginning to forget things. And when I got home, I was getting really bad headaches, and I didn't sleep at night, and things were beginning to pile up. Many of you recognise these symptoms yourself. I used to panic when I was at home and couldn't think about anything else except school and never switch off. And then when I went into school, I was always Mr. Up, on top of everything, always on top. But then when I went into my room quietly, I was quaking and really scared, a bit like a swan, swimming serenely on the surface, but then flapping like mad underneath. So I was really struggling and I just didn't know what to do about it. So a couple of things I tried to go on some training, but the budget wouldn't allow me to do it. So I thought, well, the only thing I can possibly do now to get out of this is to change my career within teaching and stop being a head teacher. So I thought, well, what am I good at? What was I good at when I trained? What did I really like doing? And I was an artist, so I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll go and teach art. That's a good way out. So I applied for a job in a special school teaching art. And when I was interviewed by the head teacher, she was skipping around, great ex-head teacher, marvellous asset to the school. I thought I was taking early retirement, a step back. What a mistake, what a mistake. I managed 3 days in that school. I got there on the first day, I realised what a bad mistake I'd made. The children were abusive, violent, out of control. I thought I was going to teach art, but it wasn't like that at all. By the second day, I went to the deputy head and I said, look, I think I've made a really, really bad mistake here. I don't know what to do about it. And he said to me, I'm sorry, Andy, I'm retiring, I'm resigning myself, it's not right in this school. I said, I'm telling you it's not right. And he was struggling as well. By the fourth day, I was really, really getting quite upset about going into work. And I had this particular class of 15-year-olds. And I was doing this lesson with them. And I thought it was a really good lesson. I was getting them to use a camera, take pictures of each other, and then put them onto a computer and then do like a cartoon picture of them. Well, this lad came up to me and he was really abusive. He said, you're not effing taking my picture, you paedophile. You only want to take my picture so that you take it home and toss yourself off at home. And I was just completely devastated. I was really, really upset. Somehow I managed to get through to the end of the day, but I knew at that stage I just couldn't go back. So I got in the car and I drove home, and I got to the park near home because I just didn't want my children to see me in such a state. And I actually went and bought a packet of cigars, and I don't smoke that much, but I must have smoked 2 cigars. I I rang my wife up and I said, can you come and get me? I can't come home. And she came to the park and I was just a wreck. I'd lost it. I'd had a complete emotional breakdown. A week or so after I painted this picture, and this sort of summed up how I was feeling at the time. The day after this sort of mental collapse, I went to see the GP, and she was really good. She said, don't worry, there's plenty of time. Just take your time, you'll be okay. You know, you don't have to go back yet, get yourself well. And she was really quite positive. But after weeks, I knew that I just wasn't going to get right. I was really, really struggling. I couldn't focus on anything. I was getting really weepy and really sad and down. And she said, obviously, you've got a form of depression and anxiety. Now, obviously, at this stage, I got a whopping great big mortgage to pay. I didn't know how I was going to earn some money. I was worried about the job. I was worried about letting people down. I was worried about my position in society. Loads and loads of things were going on. After 2 months, I had to go back to the Education Authority, and that was really humiliating because I had to sit opposite the teacher, the head teacher who'd given me the job, and basically tell her that I just couldn't cope with doing it. And it was an awful feeling. So much so that after 6 months, when I was supposed to meet her again, I asked for her not to go. And the school negotiated for me to be terminated, and that's the terminology they use. My teaching career was terminated at that stage. They didn't feel that personnel could help me get back into school. So then I was really, really worried. I went back to my GP. I said, look, I don't feel I can go back into school or work of any type. What do you suggest I do? And he said, well, you're not really at risk. You'll be okay. And he was writing out a prescription for medication before I even sat down. And I didn't want to take medication. I wanted to try and get myself well without. So I said to him, look, I think I'd like to try and get my teacher's pension and retire on ill health. And he said, well, you could do that, but I don't think you're ill enough to see a psychiatrist. I said, well, I'm quite willing to pay for that myself. And that's what I did. I paid to see a psychiatrist who wrote this whopping great dossier on me. And he said to me, look, Andy, you've been ill for a long time. It's not just happened now. You've been ill for about 5 years from what you've described to me, all the way you've been feeling. He said, what you need to do is to put the 22 years behind you and move on. Well, that's easier said than done, isn't it? So that's what I tried to do. So I applied for the teachers' pensions and they turned me down. I think it was more to do with my age than my illness, because I was only 45. They said that I hadn't had cognitive behavioural therapy and that I needed to have second-line medication. Now, bearing in mind I didn't want to take any medication, to go on stronger medication wasn't my idea of fun. The psychiatrist said, well, we're going to have to jump through these hoops, unfortunately. So I went to see a cognitive behavioural therapist who saw me and said, Andy, I can get you to live a better life, but there's no way you're going back into school. And she wrote me a letter to say that. And I sent that in, I went on further medication, and after a few months, I got my teacher's pension. What I really needed was what's on this poster. I picked up this poster in York. It's a 19th century medication. And this, if I could take one of these tablets, everything would have been fine. Now, I think reflecting back on what happened to me, hindsight is marvellous. And there are times when I was becoming ill, when I should have sought advice and help. And I know that in education authorities there is help and advice, and there are helplines. But at that time I didn't feel that was for me, because I was Mr. Up, I was on top. If you're not sleeping, you know, you've got to learn to switch off. Chair of Governors came to me one day and said, Andy, if I saw you on the golf course on a Friday afternoon, I'd shake your hand. And he was trying to tell me to slow down, but I just didn't believe him. I thought if he saw me on the golf course on a Friday afternoon, I'd get the sack. When you feel isolated in teaching, you've got to speak to somebody. And then when you start to lose your vision, The worst thing anybody can do is to send you out to a wonderful school and show you how this is how it should be done. And that happened to me and it didn't help. And opportunities to fail. You've got to have opportunities to fail and not feel that it's you. So here I am now, a head teacher. I'm getting better. One of the things that helped me with my recovery was getting a dog. I've got a Springer Spaniel and I take him for walks every day, and that really does help me feel better. But also, my wife has been a wonderful support and wonderful carer, and she's been through the mill as well, because it's now 5 years since I was first ill. And she's been marvellous and a wonderful support to me and there for me. And when I was ill, I was doing silly things like cleaning constantly and being grumpy and stressing and worrying about everything. And my son said to me a few weeks ago, you know, you're a lot better to be around now than you ever were. And that was nice for me to hear. So what I want to say to people is, you know, treat me as Andy Hollinghurst. I'm not a diagnosis. I'm not depression and anxiety. I'm me. And something that I smile about it now, but it did upset me at the time. I was walking around my neighbourhood when I was first ill, and I met this ex-pupil, and he looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Didn't you used to be Mr. Hollinghurst?" And that really struck. You know, used to be Mr. Hollinghurst. I still am. So there's always hope. Heads up. Okay. Thank you.